Hello and welcome to Automation and AI Through the Eyes of an Attacker. Today's webinar is sponsored by Palo Alto and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I'm excited to be your host for this special event. Now, before we get to today's really timely discussion, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. Let's talk questions. So we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Now, we've got a full discussion today, so we won't be able to do a dedicated Q&A session at the end of this one, but we've got some representatives from Palo Alto available in the chat to answer your questions as they come in, so send them along as you have them. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh is going to fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues. But if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Okay, next, handouts. In the handouts section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a resource from Palo Alto about top ways to automate security operations. There are also some links labeled ATM, which stands for Actual Tech Media. One of those is the ATM Decisions Group, a panel of IT decision makers that you can apply to join to participate in some more in-depth events and other opportunities. Also, there's a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of more upcoming events like this one. So I encourage you to access all those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, I'm sure that you noticed the prize icon there on this slide. At the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. And with all that out of the way, let's get to today's fantastic discussion. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Jane Go from Palo Alto, who will be moderating the conversation. Then I'm very excited that we have Brian Krebs, a cybercrime journalist who I've been following for a long time. He's also a New York Times bestselling author of Spam Nation. Additionally, we have Devin Johnstone, who's a security operations specialist with Palo Alto. So now I'm going to turn things over to Jane to get us started.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Thanks for joining us today for the Automation Through the Eyes of the Attacker. My name is Jane Go, and I lead product marketing for Cortex XSOAR here at Palo Alto Networks, and I'll be your moderator today. With me are Brian Krebs. He probably needs no introduction, but he is cybercrime journalist, owner of the Krebs on Security blog, and now best-selling author of Spam Nation. And Devin Johnstone. He's a founding member of our Palo Alto Network SOC team and an industry expert on SOC optimization and automation. Brian and Devin, great to have you here on this session.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Jane.
So we'll start with you, Brian. What are some of the tools that you see hackers trade on the dark web or ways that they're using automation in active hacking campaigns?
Yeah, well, certainly automation is a component of almost any large-scale cybercrime operation, or even small to mid-size operation. Well, let me just back up. Anything that can be stolen can be commoditized or automated. So it doesn't really matter if we're talking about, hacked machines, botnets, proxies, stolen credit cards, identities, whatever. Even if you have access as a cyber criminal, even if you have access to just ridiculous amounts of data, stolen and very useful data, maybe you have a huge botnet, whatever, it's really hard to make money off that as a cyber criminal if you're just conducting, one-off on the corner street sales, one-off deals. So as a cyber criminal, the easiest way to scale that is to operate a quasi, automated service that operates just like a regular e-commerce website. And it's open 24/7. It's got customer support. But the key here is, in most cases, criminal services on the underground are only profitable if the proprietor doesn't have to have a lot of support costs, right? Customer support costs. And we see this all the time across criminal services offered in the underground, the minute the business starts attracting large numbers of customers, the criminal proprietors will often, sell the business. And they'll just move on to something else because sustaining it has started to massively increase, support costs and overall, work-related drudgery, and it's decreasing profits, right? And probably the key innovation in cybercrime innovation going forward is going to be things like AI-powered chatbots that take care of all that pesky customer service requests, so you don't have to. But like an example, probably the most common thing being automated, hands down today, is password spraying and general account takeover activity. And password spraying is very, very basic activity. It's just trying a whole bunch of email addresses against like the most commonly used 10,000 passwords out there. And then, you get 1% or like 0.1% hit rate. That's pretty good if you're doing, tens of millions, if you're trying this against tens of millions of accounts at a time. And that's going on at a huge scale every day. Not long ago, just to give you an example, I wrote about a bunch of crooks who'd been running this, for want of a better term, it's like a botnet. But they've had access to literally tens of millions of webmail accounts for years, which they got access to just by automating password spraying and going out there and checking every email address on the planet several times over for these commonly used passwords. So these guys would do, no joke, between 50 million and 100 million password authentication attempts daily, and get into anywhere from around 25,000 to 100,000 inboxes each week. And then they automated the process of going into these inboxes. They didn't want to do anything that would tip these people off that their inboxes were hacked. So they didn't spam from them. They didn't try to hijack their other accounts tied to it. All they did was they had a little automated bot that would log into these email accounts a couple times a week and look for payment card information, or not payment card, but gift card information, QR codes, links, whatever, and it would just siphon that. And then people affected would be like, I don't know why my Hilton's points, honors totally just went away. I have no idea, right? And they don't, because they don't know it's coming from somebody having hacked their inbox and stolen all the information. But I like this story because it's a great example of, but for innovation and but for automation, a lot of these things start to fall away, and the profitability in them becomes really questionable.
And I will add, today we're talking a lot about automation and AI from the attacker perspective, which we weren't 5, 10 years ago, even though these were already happening. There were, distributed denial of service attacks that I was dealing with 10 years ago when I first got into a role in a SOC. There were already individuals, or maybe a pair, who were conducting these attacks. Today, we're talking about automation and AI from the attacker perspective a lot more, because it's become a lot more mainstream. There is a lot more going on with large language models, which is why this is the topic du jour. But some of these attacks were already going on. It just wasn't reaching us in the news as often as it is today. So in a lot of these cases, it may not be a large team or a group of individuals who are involved. You hear about some big breaches that occur today, and it might just be one person, a pair, who have been conducting these attacks, and they're able to reach such a large scale because they were using automation already. Where we're now playing catch up is on the defensive side. So we didn't have a lot of tools like we do today in security operations, where we were able to fight fire with fire and meet the attackers where they already were. And to Brian's point, things like just spraying credentials that are available on the web, that's not new from an attacker perspective.
Yeah, certainly there are a lot more adversaries, and you're right. I would look at AI tools as kind of like force multipliers in the sense that it makes it easier for the work of one to appear to be the work of many. So in that sense, it kind of muddies the water a little bit. Actually, there's a lot of ways that AI is muddying the waters, but that's one of them.
So, Devin, just to kind of expand on what you just mentioned, from your perspective as a SOC analyst, where do you think us defenders, whether it be vendors or SOC teams, need to evolve here, be it the tactics, the tools, or the people skills to kind of fight these automated attacks that are happening more and more?
Certainly. So I just had my 10th anniversary as a SOC analyst. I've had the opportunity to be a SOC analyst in an organization that had 80,000 employees. And then when I joined Palo Alto Networks, we were less than 10,000 employees. And at the beginning of building both of those security operations centers, we weren't using any automation. We had what we call now a legacy SIM, where it was really up to us to take in as much data as possible. And then we were spending more than half of our day just trying to figure out how we were going to use all of this data, how we were going to correlate, how we were actually going to digest it. And even just using Palo Alto Networks as an example today, 3 years ago, we were ingesting about 1 billion events, just occurrences, network connections that we then had to analyze and try to find the threats in. And that number today is 36 billion, just 3 years later. So we've not grown as a company 36x. It's just the amount of data that we're taking in. So we have to use automation today to deduce that data, bubble up the most important stuff, so that we, as a SOC team or on the defensive side, whatever that may look like for your organization, we have to be using AI to filter that down to a manageable number of alerts that we can subsequently investigate. I've talked to some service providers who have hundreds of SOC analysts, and even then they're still trying to keep up with the amount of data that they have to deal with. So we know the answer is not in trying to hire more of us to look into all of that data. We're already past that point where it's a must to be leveraging automation and AI to both gather and analyze, but then subsequently do the response as well when we actually have to go and remediate something.
Yeah, the stack isn't getting any shorter anytime soon. Yeah,
certainly not.
Something's got to give.
Great. Well, let's kind of pivot over a little bit into the AI, the open source AI tools here. So, Brian, do you see a similar kind of AI ecosystem on the criminal side where applications are really being built now to leverage tools like OpenAI? Or on the same topic, are there any creative ways that criminals are using existing AI tools in the open market like ChatGPT? And are these companies that are providing this type of service doing any kind of monitoring of any kind of malicious use of their technology?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of effort being put into what they call jailbreaks for AI tools. So basically, Microsoft, Google, who's working on these tools, they're putting guardrails on these chatbots so that it's difficult to coax them to doing things like, I don't know, writing malicious software or, email, really convincing email phishing scams. And so what we're seeing is people will figure out ways to remove or blind or expand those guardrails, just to put it simply. And it suddenly, those platforms are being resold then as kind of jailbroken AI platforms and marketed on cybercrime forums and other places, and they'll very much happily, write very convincing BEC emails. They'll compose useful, unique malware in almost any programming language that you want, and very likely that thing will get past most antivirus out there. So there are a lot of these kind of one-off jailbreaks that we see, come up a lot and advertised in the underground. Last month, I tracked down and interviewed the principal coder behind a kind of rogue chat GPT service called Worm GPT. And they very much advertised themselves on crime forums saying, our service will happily write malware or, phishing scams or do whatever you want it to do. That guy that I interviewed was a 22-year-old recent college graduate from Portugal. And, when I caught up with him, he was like, yeah, we're dialing this back a little bit because it's being used for all kinds of crazy stuff. And we don't like any of it. And that's not what we really tried to do. What we wanted was, we were more interested in, could we do it? Yes, we can. Okay. And now the guy was kind of like, well, should we do this? Because it's being used to write an awful lot of malware and phishing scams and stuff. So he pulled the plug on it that day and said, I'm done with this project, go figure something else to do. But we'll see those things again. His service can easily be rebuilt. And I think it was based on an earlier version of a large language model that got leaked and uploaded online. So, that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. And there are a lot of these jailbreaks. They tend not, kind of like jailbreaks for iPhone, in a sense that they're around and useful for a couple days, and then they get clobbered, or whatever thing they were using to get around gets fixed. But I think pretty soon we're probably going to see some more, some other tools, some other methods that might be a little more cybercrime-y, aggressive in terms of being able to sustain some of these jailbreak systems, some of these off-brand GPT platforms, if you will. Just because there's a lot of interest in this. And it's fascinating to me that as much interest as there is in all these tools, both from the defender side and the offensive side, I mean, right now, primarily the biggest impact I see from a negative side of use of AI is curious people or cyber criminals downloading tools they thought were GPT jailbreaks, and they turned out to be malware. So, the cyber criminals are really latched on to things that capture the public's attention, whatever the news of the day is, whatever everybody wants, that's where they want to be. And this is no different. And so, but right now, a lot of what I'm seeing now is just, and I don't know if Devin's seen the same thing, but it certainly is a lot of malware lures.
Yeah, certainly something we've said in security for a long time is that your humans are the weakest link in your defenses. And that's still very true today, especially with something as easy as phishing. It just takes one user to fall for a very well-crafted phishing email, and that can potentially bypass all of the millions of dollars of defenses and technology that you've put in place. And a couple of years ago, it was a bit easier to tell a phishing email, maybe it was poorly worded or formatted. Today, and one of the reasons we're so captivated by large language models like ChatGPT is they can write in very convincing, good grammar English. So now we're dealing with potentially automating attacks that are a lot harder to detect that it's not an actual human behind them who is contacting you for a legitimate purpose. And they can do that at scale. Before we had ChatGPT, you still had search engines, but it was really up to you to go and gather that content and deduce the answers yourself. Now you have language models that can go and do that for you and be very convincing, which makes it a lot easier for those attackers to trick your users. And then at that point, all you're dealing with is education. At Palo Alto Networks, our employees love us for the phishing tests that we do on them. They get a monthly email from our security organization, and we'll always get replies to it going, oh, you got me, because they're just so convincing, or they're related to something that they do on a daily basis. And at that point, it doesn't matter how much security technology you have in your stack. It's still really easy to convince people that they're talking to a human on the other side. So it'll be interesting to see as we go forward how we're going to tackle those challenges of education, because that's not a technology problem, that's a human problem.
Yeah, I'm not sure I should be saying this on public, but I fall for every single one of those phishing
Oh,
things
no.
that you guys sign. Especially when it comes to, you got a bonus here. It's very embarrassing.
If I could respond to that, I was just thinking, to me, like if we're talking about the most popular or the most useful forms of automation in the cybercrime underground, for me, the big innovation that I think is yet to be trumped by like tools like ChatGPT, but which I think has a lot of potential for symbiosis, is Telegram. Almost every cyber criminal who is now, talk about force multipliers. So every cyber criminal who's selling a service or goods of some kind, they're now using Telegram, okay, which is a Russian, instant message platform, very feature rich, and chances are this is how most cyber criminals now onboard or initially, interact with their new customers. And a great many of these cyber criminals are deploying, deploying their criminal service as automated bots that just sit on Telegram, and they wait for a customer to come along and give it an order, whether it's to cough up somebody's personal information or a credit profile, or open a proxy, or even, a hacked GPT interface, whatever it is. Cyber criminals of all stripes are increasingly transacting more on Telegram. And the reason I mention this, because, I kind of had an aha moment a little while ago about this. There are really important developments with every cyber criminal and his mom using Telegram. And number one, Telegram, I believe, is kind of democratized, if you will, cybercrime forum access. So like for years, if you could only get on some of the most guarded cybercrime forums out there if you got multiple members to vouch for you. They had to be existing members. You might even have to pay a non-refundable deposit. And other existing members had to say you were a trustworthy cyber criminal, right? And also, most of these communities don't allow English speakers. So, and they generally frown on anyone who speaks anything but Russian in them. But this is not the case with Telegram, where you can just reach out to cyber criminals directly. So Telegram is definitely playing a major role in helping to automate a lot of cybercrime activity. So much so that I would say, some of these online fraud shops have been turned into kind of vending machines, if you will. You have, whereas before you had cybercrime services that were only available, if you were on one of these forums, and now you just have to reach out to them directly on Telegram, or send them some Bitcoin to their bot, and it spits out whatever you paid for. So it seems to me like a lot of cybercriminal automation is very much now geared toward interacting with potential customers, because as any business will tell you, customer support costs are a huge, money sink. So I just want to follow up on some of the thinking I was trying to share earlier about how some of this automation has been with us for years. Mm-hmm. And I think, there's the evil marriage right there, is ChatGPT capability plus Telegram equals bad things. Bad things, man.
And whether it's Telegram or whether it's forums, even not just on the dark web, but on the ClearNet as well, the point of entry for people who want to learn how to use these tools or where they can go to start has been lowered drastically. The information is there. You mentioned the the writer of Worm GPT, who was a 22-year-old. And I've heard of a lot of breaches from folks who are even younger than that now. We're dealing with a generation of kids who grew up with an iPad in their hands, and they can use some technology better than some people who have been in the industry for 20 years. So the information is there, and it's allowing anybody to go and access this, meaning we're potentially dealing with a lot more really skilled attackers who are able to get spun up a lot quicker and then also adapt. When we start to identify one of their strategies, they're able to pivot and move on to something else very quickly. I mentioned this earlier, but when you hear about some of these big breaches, it's usually, sometimes, but not always a big group of individuals. It might be a team, but many times it's just one person who might have just learned this year, using the information that's available to them, how to commit some of these crimes.
Yeah, I think, what was it, Airbus in the last 24 hours disclosed a breach, and it was info stealing malware on somebody's computer. And it looks like the same thing is true with the Microsoft signing keys that got stolen, although probably a different class of adversaries there. But yeah, so many of these attacks start with opportunistic malware infections. Absolutely. It's kind of terrifying that way.
Yeah, kind of on that note, I mean, it's just the use of what the current tools are, here for social engineering and phishing and communications and transactions is pretty scary. But when you think about the future with generative AI and the potential impact to transform our lives, just, for in general, that's already kind of scary. But when you think of it being specifically applied for nefarious purposes, it's really downright frightening. So what are your thoughts here? And have you heard of any discussion in the cybersecurity community or even the law enforcement community to set up laws to kind of provide some enforcement guidelines or guideposts here? I'll just throw this question out to either of you. Feel free to jump in.
Sure, yeah, I can tackle this one. Something we're seeing a lot more of that's becoming a lot more common is reporting requirements for businesses when they suffer an attack. There used to be this culture of share if necessary. Businesses were afraid of a lot of the reputational damage that came with disclosing a cyber attack. But now in the United States, for example, we have a lot of new laws that are requiring reporting publicly within a certain period of time. And that means businesses are starting to focus a lot more on investing in the defense, because it's no longer just we can hide this or sweep it under the rug, and as long as we deal with it, then it's fine. But now they're being incentivized and almost forced to start building up defenses in advance of being attacked, so that they don't have to subsequently tell the world that they were breached. So this is starting to start a lot of those conversations, and this is just within the past 2 or 3 years that we've started to see this as well. The White House here in the United States has also initiated programs within their own departments within the federal government to start mandating cybersecurity controls, which did not exist a couple of years ago, which is terrifying to think that some of these services that, over 300 million people rely on to secure their daily lives did not have basic cybersecurity standards. So we're just seeing that shift now as these attacks start to pick up in pace, and we're hearing about it in the news almost every day, which is not something that 5-10 years ago was, front page news almost every day. But now, to Brian's point about just Airbus recently, it's almost like clockwork. You wake up every morning and it's another organization that suffered another breach. Another big one that happened this week was MGM. Their website has been down for over 48 hours because they suffered some sort of cyber attack. We still don't know all of the details there, but it's nonstop. So we have to now be looking at putting these plans into place, no matter if you're a large organization, small organization, government. It impacts everybody. And especially when there are potentially human lives at stake. If you're a service where you have people using your service every day and you could potentially be impacting human lives, it's even more important.
Yeah, I don't know. Those are all good points. I don't know what role law enforcement has in fighting AI abuse, and I hope we see some careful consideration of this very complex issue by lawmakers, and I think we will, because we've already failed to do much to stop this kind of endless string of data breaches. And my concern is that corporations embracing AI without also a strong handle on their own data governance, we're all going to have a bad day because of this. I think it's long past time, for U.S. lawmakers, and this is probably what they should do in response to concerns over AI. It's time to pass some meaningful privacy and data protection laws here in the U.S. Because it's my view that this country is leaking so much data all the time that it's become a national security issue and a major, let's not forget, a major information asymmetry issue vis-a-vis our adversaries. And already, it's the case that way too many organizations collect and store far too much sensitive information for far too long without necessarily a strong business case for doing that. And all the while it's nobody's job to ask, gee, how valuable is this data to us versus to cyber criminals? How much value do we derive from actively storing all of this information all the time? What's the risk if we have an intrusion? So, data governance is a major challenge, even for the smallest, the small to mid-sized organizations. And yet, too often organizations overlook the economy and the old saying, you don't have to protect what you don't collect. Right? And my fear is that with, so many organizations jumping with both feet into AI, just dumping stuff in there, the volume of data being generated and stored and needing to be protected as a result of these tools is going to increase by orders of magnitude, which is not great overall for so many companies that are already struggling to protect their data, and it's not going to be great for consumers either. The other thing I'd say is that, and this goes to, I think, something that Devin was kind of touching on. I don't know if he said it exactly, but a lot of the, I think a lot of the adoption of AI tools and technology are going to come from organizations who feel like they have no other choice. In other words, when automation through AI tools gets to the point where you need to have automation with AI to deal with the influx of stuff coming at you, well, then you've kind of joined the fray, and it kind of creates an arms race. And my concern with tools like AI ChatGPT is that they're basically designed to create a whole bunch of arms races. I mean, think about this for a second. Like, let's take the law profession, for example. Like, you got a bunch of lawyers. I don't know if you talk to anybody in the legal industry these days, but they're really excited about ChatGPT. Let me tell you, they are super excited. They're getting these things to write briefs for them, and do all kinds of research. And who knows if lawyers are going to be replaced by robots and ChatGPT? I hope so. That would be nice. If we all of our had our robots who actually had a law degree, that would be worth buying. But it's too soon to say this is going to happen. But I guarantee you, what's going to happen is AI, as it gets more involved in the law, is going to start filing lawsuits. And you know what's going to happen then? The court system is going to have to start turning to AI to figure out which of these lawsuits are complete garbage and which ones it actually should consider. I don't think we're too far away from that, although I wouldn't hold your breath with the court systems. They're about the most antiquated systems you can think of, and maybe that's a good thing. But just like trying to, on a more meta level, I think what is benefiting the defenders a lot is that the cybercrime underground, and I know I keep coming back to this, but I think it's really important. It's still very, very fractured in that, it's generally very broken down along the lines of who's in what crime forum, what their specialty is, whatnot. And there aren't a lot of, again, meta services that will do things like shop for you as the aspiring criminal, right? Like, say you wanted to build a botnet, right? And you go, well, how the heck do I do that? Well, you need hosting, you need spam, you need all these other things. Well, what if there was like an Expedia, for cybercrime that went around and just said, okay, well, these two guys have the best, spamming service, so you can take advantage of their API and integrate that, and build a soup to nuts cybercrime operation for you by cobbling together different automated tools from different services, offering discounts if you buy in bulk, that kind of thing. There's a lot of room for growth in this market, and there's a lot of room for AI to I don't want to say sing kumbaya and hold hands and everything, but it does definitely bring that world together a little more. I think it has the potential.
There was an interesting point you made on the large language models filing lawsuits. There was, when ChatGPT came out, those tests putting it against the bar exam, and did pretty good as far as I remember. And it's been interesting to see when we first started seeing these tools come out versus now. They've definitely been toned down a little bit. There are a lot of things that you could ask when the launch happened that now it says, I'm sorry, I can't answer this. It's a little risky. So there's definitely been some attention put on putting those guardrails on. The other point, Brian, you made that I wanted to go back to was on this being a national security risk. We are hearing now cyber referred to as the fourth plane of warfare. We've had air, land, and sea, but now there are wars being fought online. And if you're not, tuned into the industry, you may not hear about this as often. But in our threat intelligence research, we watch a lot of interaction going on between countries who have conflict or who are at war. And it may not be as physical anymore. There is a lot of back and forth going on affecting services under the hood, power plants, water treatment plants being targeted, which is bringing the war to the doorstep of a lot of the public, whether they know it or not. And this is something that we're going to continue to have to watch and make sure that we're putting investment into defenses for.
For sure.
Awesome. Any more closing thoughts here? And before we kind of pivot over to, there's lots of questions that kind of coming in, to some of the questions that have kind of come in.
Yeah, I've seen some of the questions about how we're using automation and AI on the defensive side at Palo Alto Networks. So although the topic of conversation today is on the attacker front, we know that we need to be meeting these attacks with automation inside our defense. So in the Palo Alto Networks Security Operations Center in the past couple of years, we've started using Cortex XOR to do a lot of the automated response, which was new for us a couple of years ago. So rather than trying to hire enough analysts to investigate and respond to every single alert, we now have these automation playbooks, which can do a lot of the repetitive stuff for us, where we previously had to do it all manually. And a question that I get asked a lot is this ever going to take our jobs? And my response to that is not yet. Maybe when it gets even more smart, it's possible. But today, what we're doing is giving the tools the repetitive stuff that takes up our time, where it really doesn't add value to have a human looking at this stuff every single day, whether it just be gathering information or doing basic communication out to other tools. That's the stuff that we really want to focus the technology on, so that we, as the humans in the defensive side of the house, can focus more on contextual information, thinking like an attacker would, and trying to do more threat hunting as opposed to just being in the weeds with tooling. And so that's on the response side. And then just last year, Palo Alto Networks also launched Cortex XIM, which replaces the legacy SIM, or Security Information and Event Manager, allowing us to do a lot of the correlation of data. So the detection side of things before we're even doing a response. I mentioned the number earlier of 36 billion events that Palo Alto Networks ingests every day. It would be impossible for us as a team to go in and try to make sense of all of that data. So now we've got the machine learning going in, bubbling up the most important stuff, reducing that 36 billion to a manageable number of today about 130 alerts that the security operations team actually needs to look at. And so this is what we're trying to help our customers with today. It's our primary goal to show them that it doesn't have to be so overwhelming. You are going to continue to grow and scale. So it's time to put the technology in place today so that you're prepared in 5 to 10 years when this just continues to scale rapidly and you want to avoid being swamped with that overwhelming amount of data. So the Cortex product line has really become the single pane of glass for us in the SOC. And we're trying to show our customers the way to get there as well. It is allowing me to do a lot more interesting work that I didn't have the time for a couple of years ago. It used to just be trying to configure tools, but now we're able to get out and look at a lot more tuning and looking at how can we improve instead of just being overwhelmed with alerts.
Yeah, Devin, you talked about being overwhelmed. I guess that's an area that we haven't really touched on in terms of like for the defenders, what it means if more attackers are turning to automated tools, AI, and things like this to kind of confuse people and overwhelm defenders. I was reading this story a couple weeks ago where there was an attack where somebody had, I don't know if you'd call it an attack, somebody had flooded a bunch of security bug reporting platforms.
Oh, yeah.
With an automated tool that apparently produced more than like 100 CVEs within a ton of popular libraries like Python and Postgres and curl and all this. And the people who noticed this, they said they thought, AI was involved somehow at producing these phony CVEs. But this is a good example of how AI can be used to kind of muddy the waters and also reduce trust in security systems. And a lot of organizations are very heavily invested in protecting data from being stolen, but very few of them are looking, or they're not set up to look at the issue of data integrity. And I think this is an area where AI has potentially just huge implications. And I worry, again, that by throwing all the data that they're trying to protect into AI, we could have, some horrific outcomes in the future, when some of that data that was never supposed to see the light of day starts showing up in ChatGPT answers for random things. The other thing I'd say is probably the most visible example of defenders being besieged and very public is what's happened with LinkedIn over the last year. I started tracking this as an issue. Now, this has been an issue for several years. Inauthentic accounts on every platform, it's a big deal. But I would say over the last year and a half, 2 years, what we've seen is just a massive number of AI-generated accounts showing up on LinkedIn. And I started looking at this last summer when somebody tipped me off and said, hey, why do all these companies that track who the CISOs are at all these companies, why are they all wrong? Why are they all saying it's these people? Well, guess what? Their automated tools got screwed too. So, it's pretty interesting to see that. What happened with LinkedIn is they were going around and they were using some level of automation. I don't know how much AI was involved, but it certainly was involved in producing the profile photos for each of these, which were done with AI tools to make them unique to each profile. But then their tools went out and snarfed like a paragraph from one person's resume and then something else from somebody else. And it just created this huge hodgepodge. And it's, that's still a challenge for that. And right after that, LinkedIn came out and finally said, yeah, we're having a little bit of a problem here. We're working on it. And then like the next day, Apple and Amazon, like their homepages on LinkedIn, one day they said like 900,000 employees, and the next day it was down to 500,000. And I'm pretty sure they didn't lay off half their workforce. It was because half of them were bots. And it's really hard to overstate the scale of an operation like this. But again, what AI excels at is confusing the scale of your adversaries.
Certainly.
You have no idea a lot of times. if it's one guy with really powerful tools, or if it's 100 guys, with 100 powerful tools. And in some ways, like I said, it's democratizing cybercrime, but it's also making it a lot more efficient.
Yeah, distraction on its own is a technique, whether that distraction is intentional or whether you've distracted yourself with too much data and not enough consolidation of it. It can certainly take away from what is the most important and distract the teams. So we're looking at some of your questions here in the Q&A box. So we'd like to answer some of those in the remaining time. If you keep those coming, I do see a couple good ones here we can start addressing. I have one here that asks, if they don't have a business case, what is driving companies to collect and store data? Is it negligence? So I'm guessing this question is more on the collecting user data for a nefarious usage, but I'm going to address this as what would inspire companies to start collecting data for the purpose of defenses. And a lot of what we see today is that companies haven't invested in their defenses until they've been breached. So the chief information security officer or the security team might not be high enough up in the organization, or they may not have enough political capital to say we need to be investing in our defenses until suddenly there is a big public breach and the organization's leadership is finally throwing money at investing in defenses. That's usually the biggest business case for a lot of organizations today. Obviously, we encourage investing in your defenses before it becomes a problem. That way you can avoid as much reputational and even financial risk as possible. But definitely there is a trend we still see today of it not getting enough attention, whether that be because the security leadership doesn't have a seat at the table. So that's something we really believe in and advise everyone, all of our customers, to ensure that security is not just an afterthought.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what you said. I don't want to beat up on the marketing people too much because they drive a lot of decisions in how companies collect and store data. So, in general, I can't speak to individual organizations, obviously, but in general, the marketing people are going to insist that that customer acquisition and customer retention are some of the biggest costs that any organization has. And the more information you have about your users, the more able you are to retain those customers. I'm not sure that is entirely true, and it certainly changes the equation when an organization, like Devin said, has a breach. But I don't know. I feel like at some point, organizations have to have that come to Jesus moment where somebody says, wait a minute, why are we doing it this way? And unfortunately, as Devin said, that's usually only going to happen when there's a business case for doing so, or a risk case that is, spelled out and insisted at and pursued by the highest leaders of the organization. And to Devin's point, in 2018, I did just on a lark. I was like, I want to see I want to go on all the websites of the Fortune 100 companies, and I want to see how many of these companies list in their executive ranks on their websites any security people at all. And so in the Fortune 100, it was 4 in 2018 that did that, despite the fact that 100% of these companies, 100% of their business would fail and stop and grind to a halt if all their IT stuff stopped working, right? So forget about that for a second. But that was 2018. So I did that analysis a few months ago again, and we're up to 5. So I think what that tells you is, I don't think it's fair to say that just because those 95 companies don't list somebody on their security people on their executive page doesn't mean they don't care about security. But it probably does tell you something about how forward-thinking they are, about what they're doing with their data, how they're protecting it, and whether it doesn't make sense to whittle that down, because again, you don't have to protect what you don't collect and keep, and at some point, you can increase the number of resources you have to do the defense. You can shrink the number of adversaries that want to undo your entire organization, or you can shrink the amount of data that you have to protect, or you can try to do all three. But I think, the thing that's most in the wheelhouse of your average organization is the latter, right? Just kind of dialing back some of this data collection and making the business case, having to defend the business case for keeping that data indefinitely. And I'll tell you what, I get so mad when I hear about companies stealing, having data that was on their servers for 10 years stolen. And then you go back and they go, well, okay, so these guys were in our network for a year, but we're not really sure if that was the beginning because we don't have logs going back that far.
Yeah.
And yet they've got all their customer data going way back further, So this is, and by the way, this is not, something that only happens to small to mid-sized organizations. Microsoft made this claim in response to the incident I talked about earlier, where they were stealing the sign keys and going off and, So, I mean, that's not an excuse. And if your answer is, well, we don't have the logs, something broke down in your analysis of the threats that you're facing today, and you need to go back to the drawing board, probably.
That's a great segue into this next question I have here is, are we seeing an increase in attacks against AI being leveraged by companies, aka data poisoning? And do we have any guidance for companies who are looking to adopt AI within their own processes without putting themselves at risk for things like data poisoning? This is a really interesting one because you'll notice, again, going back to the ChatGPT example, that it doesn't have data post the year 2021. So there is presumably a bit of defense there by not allowing recent data to be used in the learning. But from a defender standpoint, we don't have that luxury. We're trying to detect things as fast as possible so we don't end up in the scenario that Brian just described, where we don't have logs for something that happened some time back when we're actually trying to investigate an attack. So listen, this is really why we need to rely on automation today, especially on the defensive side. We don't want to be bogged down with dealing with alerts because we want to make sure that we're going out and looking for all of this healthy data so that when we do have an incident, that we have the tools and the information at our fingertips to detect as quickly as possible and subsequently respond. And we have this saying in security that we're not asking ourselves if we will be attacked. It's a matter of when, and the way that we're going to be able to respond and defend as quickly as possible is making sure that we have that data. And so to answer your question, Zach, about data poisoning, this is why today as a security team, we're really focused on making sure that we're ingesting the data that we need, that data is recent, that it's healthy. So we actually have security engineering roles today who their full-time job is not as a incident responder, but just to make sure that those incident responders have healthy tools and data to make sure that they're able to do their jobs effectively. And then on the back of that question, I also saw a question about, what are the opportunities for these roles, specifically with building automation in Cortex XOR? Is that a good career to get into today? And I'd say absolutely. 5 years ago, we didn't really see job postings for automation engineers in the Security Operations Center, but now there are. We have a couple automation engineers on our SOC team, and that is a dedicated role. Some of them have worked on the incident responder side, and this has given them the opportunity to move into a new role, making our jobs a lot more diverse. But absolutely, you can go out there today and look for a specific job as an automation engineer, whether it's with XOR or another tool. So I strongly encourage you to look into that as a potential career option, because there are plenty of those opportunities out there.
Yeah, just riffing on something Devin just said. I don't know, I do, that is one of the few things that keeps me up at night, which is, again, like I said, the idea, I don't know what you meant exactly by, the questioner meant exactly by data poisoning, but if it's being able to be less confident in the veracity or usefulness of the data, I think that is, we have to keep in mind that certainly there is a large amount of room for growth in things like disinformation and through the use of AI. My sense is, though, that the crooks still very much understand that it's all about the data. They want the data. They'd rather not have the data in any kind of adulterated form. But in a sense, though, now if you're the subject of a targeted attack or an attacker who wants to be punitive against you for whatever reason, then all bets are off. And this is something that, like I said, this is really kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies at night, because I said this a decade ago, and it's still true. If somebody can get in your network and deploy a spam bot, they can just as easily deploy a wiper or get in there and change your data. And it's scary to me because as I said, I don't think data integrity is something that most tools are set up to look at, instrument. Again, it's all that most organizations can do to just keep a lid on all the data they have, let alone figure out whether it is exactly the same data that they fed into their own dog food, right?
Right.
Right. So, there was an attack a couple of weeks ago, and I hope it's an outlier, but it was, I think it was a Scandinavian hosting firm that had, gotten into a data ransom situation, and the bad guy said, "Oh, you're not going to pay. That's fine. We'll just delete all your data." And, I can see that becoming more common, especially in confrontational situations where the attackers, maybe they're not the top tier attacker, but they're somewhere in the middle. And there are a lot of those now where they just don't care. They just take you down. And that to me is really scary. But I have to think about the question in terms of the roles for building automation. Although I would say I'm interested in your thoughts on this, Deb.
Yes.
I think companies need to be a lot more discriminating about the types of connections that they're letting interact with their entire online presence. A huge percentage of bad stuff that's hitting corporate firewalls and websites and all this is automated.
Yep.
And on top of it, it's being sent through proxy systems.
Yes.
So as much as, compromised systems. And there are now a couple of services, I think one of them, Spur. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. They're wonderful. They track, I think, over 100 different criminal proxy services and let you profile those. If you see the telltale signs of that stuff coming at your network, drop it, let it go. There's almost no chance that you want to accept that traffic. And I feel like we all need to get smarter about, again, that's another way to whittle down the pile, is be a lot more discriminating about who you interact with in the first place.
Certainly. I definitely connect the data poisoning question to what you mentioned earlier, Brian, about the attack by distraction or by incorrect data. To segue into another question from Clark here about, do we see a vector where AI misinformation is used or propped up to be made as a source of truth, or showing that an attack, which is not really an attack, is to distract the team from what is actually going on? And absolutely, that is a big concern. We have the benefit as the security team to choose what data we're taking in. But as Brian mentioned, when we're dealing with a public attack surface where there are connections coming in from either other organizations or vendors that we use, supply chain attacks now where organizations are being compromised through vendors that they are using, not themselves directly. Obviously, being a security company, this is of great concern for Palo Alto Networks. We want to make sure that all of the data that we are allowing in is not going to distract us from the most important stuff.
Yeah, I think at some level, you have to expect AI tools to be wrong, and to be wrong a lot, and in important ways. So it's just, nobody can just hand over the reins for their defenses to automation. I mean, we have really, really tried to automate the crud out of everything on security. But that only gets you so far. As Devin was saying, you need, somebody needs to actually be the janitor and go clean it up, go clean up the mess and fix things. And I worry that, there's a temptation to assign outsized importance to things that may be determined by looking at large amounts of data. To the extent that we can't actually peer through all that and perceive the patterns there, we go, oh, well, it must have detected it.
Yep.
We just can't see it, right? But it's super important, and I don't care what the determination is or what it is you're using this for, it's really important that somebody at the end of that decision tree, a human makes the decision, right?
Certainly.
Don't let Skynet push the button, right? Just keep it in a box and hopefully we won't die. So
Yes.
And again, I want to thank both of our speakers, Brian and Devin, for a very interesting session. Thank you very much for your time, and the audience too for staying with us. Appreciate your time. And like I said, we will be posting this very shortly on demand for all of you as well for review. And please obviously share this with your colleagues and your team if it's interesting for the rest of the team. All right. Thank you, everyone. And,
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, yeah, and thanks to Jane and Brian and Devin for putting together a really informative presentation. Great discussion. Really appreciate your time today, and thanks for making some time for questions after all as well. So I'd like to give a quick reminder to everybody, this is your last chance to grab those handouts before we close the event in a minute or two. And the last thing we have here is the prize drawing. So the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card today is Gary Snipes from Pennsylvania. So congratulations to Gary. We'll be in touch about getting your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Palo Alto for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending. That concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.